I'm going to talk about this concept that I've known about for decades, but the phrase that I heard the first time I can remember hearing it, sorry, let me fix this camera first, was about a month ago when one of the kids in my class asked me about it. And he was asking me a question about how can martial arts help us with growth mindset. And I was like, growth mindset, I think I know what that means. And so I gave a talk about it, and I roughly talked about it. But I have heard of this concept of growth mindset in different terms way back when I started to help teach the kids at my seafood school in Michigan. And I was basically learning how to teach through positive reinforcement, but also focusing on giving positive reinforcement for effort rather than for just being good at something or even like achieving something. And of course, when I heard my Sifu explain this idea to me, it made perfect sense. I was like, yeah, of course it makes sense. You want to reward somebody's effort rather than just reward them for doing a good job, because then, that's kind of just in the moment, but effort is something that persists. And it's like, yeah, we're reinforcing the kids trying hard. And I think that probably started to sink in for me, myself, in my own practice too. But I realized as I was listening to this lecture on this topic the other day that it's something that I didn't fully understand the mechanics of, and I think I kind of took it for granted that many other people have heard of this idea before. And I think honestly that my parents' generation probably had no idea about this. It was something that a landmark study in the late 90s, which is after I was a child, started to describe the benefits of, and where people really made this shift, or there was at least an understanding how in school, and we applied it in our martial arts practice and just in life, it's a really powerful thing to focus on effort rather than just getting the job done. So I thought I would talk a little bit about it tonight. I remember when I first started to teach kids back in Michigan, and I heard about this idea, I was like all excited to do it. And there was a whole, let me tell you, you guys think, I'm sure some of you think that what I do is very hard, and I'm sure some of you think that what I do is very easy, but let me tell you, teaching kids is hard. And the sheer amount of information that I was given that was like, you have to do this, that was all of these things that were kind of set up against my incompetence. All of these things that were in the way of me being able to mess up teaching kids. It would blow your mind. We put together this packet or this binder. It's like a Bible of all of these ideas of the ways that you should teach class. And at the center was this idea of giving positive reinforcement, especially to effort. But there was all this other stuff. It's like, this is exactly how you give positive reinforcement. You have to give it a little bit, you give a correction, and then you go back and you give positive reinforcement. It was all like so perfectly set up. And most of that has stayed with me, and I just practiced it so much that it became natural for me. But a lot of it was just like, there's no way I can keep all this straight under any circumstances. And so some of it, I'm sure I just don't do very well anymore. And some of it I've just, turned into my own style, and it works the way that it works. And it doesn't work the way that it doesn't work. But it is absolutely the same thing with teaching adults in whatever class. And I started off with kids, not because the stakes were lower, but just because I didn't know enough to teach adults. I knew enough to teach the kids. I think if anything, the stakes are higher with the young minds that are coming up. Everything kind of sticks in a way that you can probably remember some adult telling you something when you were a kid, and you took it so seriously that it became absolute truth to you. It was like it was carved in stone, sent down from on high. And of course, this is absolutely it. And I do my best to keep that in mind when I'm teaching and working with kids. And I'm not kidding myself by thinking that it's the same thing with adults. I'm sure that some of what I say really sticks, and some of what I say just goes right over your head, or some of what I say you hear it and you think, no, I don't agree with that, and just forget it. Totally fine. But especially when we're working with kids, they hear this stuff and it might completely shift their reality for maybe the rest of their life, but for sure at least the next, until they go to therapy. So with this idea of giving feedback that is positively reinforcing effort versus just achieving something, they've discovered that timing does not matter. If you give positive feedback before they attempt to do the thing, and you're like, I love how much you try when you do this. If it's in martial arts, which is the world that I live in, I'll just use that as an example. Right before a test, I tell a kid or an adult, I love how hard you try. You just pour everything into this. In that very next time that they are trying to do something, they're more likely to put effort into it, because that's how they get the reinforcement. And I'll eventually get into how we can make this work for ourselves, by the way. So it's not just like if you are teaching other people, but that is a big part of what we do in the dojo, is help each other and teach each other. And for sure, there are other people in your life where this will apply for you giving the feedback. So at any point, you give positive feedback for effort, it will make them try harder the next time that they are doing that thing. So it could be after they finished the test, I would say, I love how hard you tried, and that would cause them to try hard the next time. And that's really nice. I love how that is simple. It's not anything extra that I have to remember. It's just like literally at any time, just giving positive feedback for effort will cause somebody to work harder in the future. The part of this that I did not know before, which I thought was so fascinating, is that giving somebody positive feedback for what they accomplished, by just saying, for example, they do a good front kick, you just say, great front kick. The studies that they did this were more like in an academic study or a setting, so you can understand if somebody, they use the example of math problems. If a kid or an adult, if a person, gets a math problem right, and you give them the reinforcement that sounds like, great job getting that one right, that has the opposite effect from what we want. Instead of making the kid try harder next time, what it actually does is it makes them only want to do things that they know they're going to get right, because that's how they know they're going to get the reinforcements. So by telling somebody like, good job getting that right, it actually makes the people in this study try less hard by doing the stuff that they already know how to do. And then when they get faced with this situation where they have the choice between trying something new that's going to be difficult for them, where they have to actually push themselves, or just trying something that they know they can already do, they will choose to try the thing that they already know how to do. And this having like a negative correlation on both effort, but also the actual results. The kids will end up learning less and adults the same way, maybe to a lesser extent because we're already set in our ways. But this is so interesting that telling somebody good job by getting that thing right makes them more likely to basically slack off in the future, only do the stuff that they're already good at. Terrifying. So the other side of this that I thought was interesting, and I was very much in agreement with from my own experience teaching kids and adults, but mostly kids, is that people who are reinforced with effort are more honest about the results of what they've gotten. So if you give somebody a quiz and you have them fill it out, or in our class, I have the kids do push-ups, as many push-ups as you can do for 30 seconds. And then at the end, we ask them, how many did you do? If this kid has been reinforced, of course you can see where this is going. In the moment, if they're seeking reinforcement for doing a certain number, they're gonna lie about it. Versus being reinforced for effort, and they know that they've been pushing hard, a kid will gladly tell me that they did way fewer push-ups than the last kid who just told me. The last kid said 50. Very often, the kids will say 51. Like they're just trying to get the next highest number. And I'm like, really? The odds that you got exactly one more than the last kid who I asked, that wasn't even the kid sitting next to you. Amazing how that works out so often. But then you've got a student who you can tell has been reinforced by just putting in efforts. They've been told great effort. They're honest about it. Now then there's the whole other side of this, which is like, this person was not counting at all. And some of the times this happens where I ask them how many they did and they've got no clue. So then they just say a number that's somewhat like a number that they just heard. But that's a different, just a mindfulness, paying attention kind of thing. I'm talking about when we actively lie because we are trying to look good. Now, this is just a human thing. We all want to look good. And so if we are reinforced in our effort, we look good by putting forth the effort. Versus if what is reinforced is, completing the math problem or doing the kick well or something, then that's what we're looking for. So people will lie to look good in that moment. And I have to catch the kids and say, like, are you sure that's what you got? It just so happened to be one more, right, one more than that other kid. Were you actually counting? And then I'll stop the class and I'll say, remember, don't lie. This is like, I would much rather you do 5 good push-ups where you're trying really hard than 50 bad push-ups, or then lie about how many you did. So that's something that we can keep in mind if we are noticing that people are lying to us a lot. We got to stop reinforcing, giving positive reinforcement for just getting the job done. It's the effort that you put into it. They were talking about the actual brain imaging that they did with people who have had reinforcement for effort versus just being, getting reinforcement for completion. And people who have that growth mindset, is what they describe it as, having a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. People who kind of have this idea that the intelligence that you have or the ability that you have is fixed. So I'm either getting it right or not. There's no thought towards how can I improve myself? It's like, this is just how I'm going to do. So growth mindset versus fixed mindset. The brain imaging, when you tell somebody with the fixed mindset, you got it wrong, they have purely this emotional response, which is like, oh, I'm a failure. I look dumb. I messed up. I'm bad. Bad for me. Bad, bad, bad. That's as far as it goes. The whole, the brain imaging shows that the response just hangs out in this emotional kind of center. Versus somebody with a growth mindset, they'll get this same part of the brain lit up, but then it quickly switches over to a different part of the brain, which is more involved in like logic and thinking about what happened. How did I mess up? How did that happen? And then how can I fix it for next time? Now, it should be pretty clear why we want that kind of response. What should be less clear is how do we make that happen? So for ourselves, if we, and you want to be honest with yourself, it might not be with everything in your life, but for sure with some things, maybe in your martial arts practice or something else, you can recognize, I've got a fixed mindset where I believe that this is how good I am, this is how intelligent I am, this is my ability level, and it's fixed. And we have a tendency to think of ourselves in this way. As human beings, we think of ourselves as being fixed. This is how we are, this is how it's always going to be. That is a very bad way of looking at ourselves in life, right? It causes us to stay small and stuck. So if we can get ourselves to that growth mindset, then we immediately start looking for solutions to problems rather than getting stuck on the emotional part of, being disappointed that we look bad and that we messed up. So how do we get there? There are a couple of different things, and I talk about some of these ideas in practice and in meditation all the time. Partly, it's just as simple as practicing. So we recognize when we have the stress of, I messed up, and instead of allowing ourselves to spiral in that space and just allow that part of our brain to light up, we practice switching. And in the beginning, you might spiral for minutes or days where you eventually finally realize, wait a minute, I've been spiraling because I think that this is as good as I will ever be and I'll never be able to get better. But what I need to do is get myself out of that and start thinking about how to fix it. How can I do better next time? Maybe it took days to get there. Okay, so then practice right then. Practice switching over to that point. The more often you practice, the more quickly you will get that opportunity. You recognize when you're spiraling and you'll be able to switch over to looking for something on a logical level. How can I fix this for next time? I think, of course, meditation is a great tool for this. It gets us in touch with our thoughts, and it allows us to recognize these things very quickly. And the quicker, the better. The more often and the more quickly we practice switching over to that growth mindset, the better. The more easily it will happen for us automatically. Another way is to switch our idea or our opinion of stress itself. And this part also was very interesting to me. You guys have heard me talk about stress, and it's not something that I personally experience a whole lot of because I practice a lot of letting go, but stress for me is like the boogeyman. It is like absolutely no stress. I refuse to allow myself to experience it, and anybody else should do the same thing. If you let even an ounce of stress into your life, you are failing. And I heard this explanation of a different way of looking at stress, and I think that it can be very useful for most people. Now, if you are like me and you've been practicing for a long time and you recognize your stress right away and you shift it over into something that's helpful, then that can work. But what happens for most of us is we get stressed and then we start thinking about how we're stressed, and then we're stressing about the stress. And since we think stress is bad, that just adds more stress. So instead, I offer another option. The stress is enhancing mindset. So you can literally, and they did this again with a scientific study, you can literally just go through a half an hour long tutorial that explains how you can use stress to become better, and that in a lasting way helps people when they encounter stress to immediately flip their mindset about it into this state that feels like, oh, this is good for me. This stress is pointing me in the direction of something that I can work on, something that I can improve upon. And the actual, physical manifestation, that physiological response can be cut. We recognize it as something that's good, and instead of spiraling with it, we just shift it into something that's more useful. So we'll actually, it will cut down on the, oh man, what was it? I didn't write this part down. It's like a cortisol response. Our cortisol raises. I don't know what that face you're making is, Deborah, but we'll pretend that I'm right. You have like a longer duration of, or like more of it, cortisol, it's a hormone, right? You get this stuff in your brain and it's not good for you in large amounts. So you're able to actually take that initial kind of physiological stress response and nip it in the bud and let go of it. So this does the same thing. You shift your awareness away from just being stressed to what actually needs to be worked on. And this is what I think of emotions in general. If we're having a negative kind of emotion, it's not something that we need to force away or bury and pretend it's not happening. We use it to point us in the direction of something that we need to pay attention to. And then we either decide, I'm going to deal with this thing, or it's not worth worrying about, and so I just let it go. But the third way, which is the way that most people deal with stress, is just continue to be stressed. That's not helpful. It's going to kill you early. So in this tutorial, I don't have 30 minutes left. I've got like 3 minutes left, but I'll give you the gist of it. And I think just by listening to this talk and getting this concept, it can help all of us recognize a different way of dealing with stress. So in this tutorial, they basically just said, can you remember a time in your life when you were stressed? And it's not just like one instance, but it was like a longer period of time. And they start talking about how, that stress probably led to some kind of growth and you were able to use it to get better at something. Of course, there was a negative part of it too, but and they talk about how recent science shows that this is, literally being stressed is a sign of improvement. It's a sign that you are recognizing something that needs to get better and then growing from it somehow. I talk about this in our meditation practice. People get stressed so often that they're getting worse at meditation. And you've probably heard me explain this if you've been coming for a while, but for many people, they start to experience meditation as like, I'm getting worse as time goes on. But what's actually happening is I'm at this level, and then my mindfulness and awareness starts to improve because I've been meditating. But this is the level of thoughts that I still have. I still have 100 thoughts in my mind. Now I actually recognize them, but me looking down on 100 thoughts is like, this is terrible. Look at how bad I am. I'm getting worse. Right? But eventually we let go of these thoughts and we match our level of awareness. And now we're like at 50 thoughts. And now we're like, oh, I'm getting better. But then our awareness picks up and now we're starting to recognize more thoughts and we're looking down and we're thinking, I'm getting worse at meditation, all these thoughts that I have. Of course, if you zoom out, this is how you're going. You're kind of stepping up in this way that feels like you're going backwards. It's the same thing with stress if we allow it to be that way. So I think that meditation is, as ridiculous as this may sound, meditation might be a huge source of stress for you. And of course, at the end of a meditation, you will very likely have fewer thoughts and feel more relaxed. But in it, sometimes there is stress. And stress doesn't have to be that dramatic. It's literally just the feeling in that moment of, I'm having thoughts. It's the feeling in the moment of, I'm uncomfortable physically, I need to move or something. And all of that stress, that little bit of resistance, can either in that moment mean to us, I'm failing, I'm bad at this, and then the rest of that meditation is going to be bad. Or it can mean to us, okay, this resistance is a sign of me getting better. I'm actually recognizing the thoughts that I had. That's what the stress is. It's just like when you lift weights and you feel that resistance. It's a sign of you getting stronger. So when you meditate and you start to recognize your thoughts, or you're having some kind of stress around it, recognize that this is a good thing. Likely, that will allow that thought to just disappear and you'll be back in the present. And then at some point in the very near future, something else will come up. There will be some kind of stress around that. And if you recognize the stress is good for me, this stress is enhancing my meditation by causing me to be aware of the thoughts, by giving me the opportunity to let go and be in the present, then that's what will happen. So let's practice that tonight. Sit comfortably. Close eyes, spine straight, eyes up, turn, relax, watch the breath. Let go of all thoughts, worries, and cares. Be here now.